Hey, what's going on guys? Alex here with more tips on how to improve your chess game. Today I will share with you some tips for the opening that helped me get to 2000 rating and beyond. I will show you how to develop a good opening foundation without having to memorize tons of opening moves, lines and variations. These are essential before you start your chess journey. Let's get started. So there are basically three phases in the chess game: the opening, the middle game, and the end game. In the opening, we typically want to develop our pieces, preferably to attacking squares. We want to have some control of the center, and we want to put our king in safety behind our pawn chain, and this phase typically ends when we can connect our rooks and bring them to the center of the board. A huge mistake lower level or amateur players make is that they want to memorize the opening moves. The drawback is that they end up in situations in which they do not understand the middle game plans or the end games that arise behind their pawn structure. So memorizing opening moves is a bad idea. Of course, at some point in your chess career, this will be necessary, but the most important part is to understand the moves and the plans for the middle game. Tip number one, or principle number one, is to control the center. The center are these four squares here, and usually we accomplish this by moving our king pawn forward 2 spaces or our queen pawn forward 2 spaces. This will look something like this: pawn here, our opponent plays there, and we put our other pawn on the center of the board. And if we can get both pawns there, even better. Tip number two, or principle number two, is to develop your pieces. And this is a continuation of control of the center, since we want to do the same thing with our minor pieces. Usually we want to bring out our knights first to the squares c3 and f3, and we're going to follow that by bringing our bishops out to preferably c4 and f4. From the center, they will control the maximum number of squares. An example of this is the knight. A knight that's in the center can go to 8 different squares, while a knight that's not on the center and it's on the edge of the board, notice the knight starts on this square. From here, it can only go to 3 different squares. 1, 2, 3. Now, notice this knight, it can only go to 2 squares if it's all the way in the corner of the board. 1, 2 squares. This concept is true for all the chess pieces. Also remember that our opponent is trying to do the same thing, so part of our game plan is to prevent him from achieving the same goals we're trying to get to. So also strive to control the center and develop in a way that puts constant pressure to our opponent. A perfect example of this is the Ruy Lopez, where we start pawn to e4, pawn to e5 by our opponent, we go knight to f3, a developing move, and at the same time we're hitting this pawn on e5. Our opponent typically here goes knight to c6, a developing move, and also protecting the same pawn. Here, the Ruy Lopez continues bishop to b5, we develop, we get ready to castle, but here the most important thing is that we put in pressure on the knight, and the knight is the one piece that's protecting this pawn, so if we're able to remove the knight from the board, we can hope of gaining this pawn for free. Tip number 3, or principle number 3, try not to move the same chess piece twice. In chess, time is extremely important. Remember that when we play, both players alternate moves, so whoever gets to their desired setup first usually wins. An example of this is the Alekhines defense, in which we keep attacking the knight with our pawns, while at the same time we get good control of the center. And notice that this knight from this square on g8 moved 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and because of that, we were able to get this very strong center with our pawns. Tip number 4, or principle number 4, don't bring out the queen too early. It is extremely common for beginner players to want to use this piece, especially to go for quick mating attacks like the scholar's mate seen here on the screen with bishop to c4, queen to h5, attacking the f7 square. As you get better, these attacks will not work and you will be left with a misplaced queen, and you will give your opponent instead the opportunity to achieve all the tips we are discussing here. Your queen is the most valuable piece, and in general, I will not develop her until all my minor pieces have been developed. To add a point to this, the queen is much more effective if it has other pieces to work with. So the more development you have, the stronger she will be. In this example we have on the board, our opponent can simply continue the game with g6. He prevents the checkmate. Our queen again has to move, and he will continue to develop his pieces while our queen is just moving all around the board, achieving absolutely nothing. So do not move this piece until you have completely finished your development of the minor pieces. Tip number 5, or principle number 5, and perhaps the most important one, is king safety. And this just means castling your king. And usually the quicker the better. The whole idea of chess is to checkmate the king, so it will protect the king behind its own pawn chain and behind their minor pieces is usually desirable. Not to mention that when you do castle, the clumsy rooks that were in the corner can now come to the center or to open files depending on what opening you choose, and it will be more effective there. From here, we will move our queen, we will connect our rooks, we will bring the rooks to the center, and we would have finished our opening phase of the game. Remember that while you're trying to do this, you must keep your opponent from doing the same. Also, this is just a guideline, and there are exceptions, so always be careful and be flexible to changing plans or the order of the guidelines in order to maximize your results. So when you're studying any particular opening, always keep these principles in mind, and it will be a lot easier to understand the moves and keep them in your memory bank. Those are the tips I have for you. Hope this helps in your understanding of the opening phase of the game. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below and I will be happy to reply. Like the video and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the bell so you don't miss when the next upload happens. Stay safe, have a great day, and show respect to your opponent. See you next time.